the beauty of working together. He always be able to do far more than we can ever imagine if we allow him to orchestrate things, and me being just a part of his orchestration.
The power of a good collaboration is that you draw an expertise that could not be accessed in any other way.
I saw the people that God was using around the world and felt that we needed to come together and know each other, pray together, work together.
That's really the promise of a large network like Lausanne.
A very warm welcome to the Lausanne Movement podcast for those who have a passion to accelerate global mission together. I am your host, Jason Watson, and today on the podcast, we have a very special episode lined up for you. You see, over the course of the past week, we have gathered thousands of Christian leaders from across the world, online and in person, for the 4th Lausanne Congress. During the course of the week, we have gathered together in collaborate groups where we have been trained in collaborative action, and we have left with the commission to form collaborative action teams to advance the gospel across the world. So we as a podcast team have put together a mashup of different interviews in which our guests have spoken into the aspect of collaborative action. We're going to hear from some great guests like Yuri Creel, Ji-Yang Yu, Dr. Ivor Pubalan, Dr. Eiko Takimazawa, and Dr. Leighton Ford, and many more. And so I hope that you enjoy this very special episode. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to our podcast so that you don't miss when the next one drops. Hope you enjoy the podcast. See you next week.
Thing that we're on the verge of is this idea of taking action together. I believe that there's a collaborative action that's about to take place in the church. And never before have a generation been at this brink of being able, the church has never had more resource. The church has never been more connected. Our ability to connect to the entire planet, to every tribe, tongue, and nation around the world has never been greater than what it is right now. And never in its history has that church had greater resource, greater information, greater products, greater ways of explaining the truth. We're ready to go. If we can remove the duplication and work in synergy, I'm convinced that as a generation, we can fulfill the task given to us by the Great Commission in our generation. And that is my hope, that Soul would be this catalyst that will catalyze collaborative action within the global church. I think what really stirs me as I travel around the world and as I connect with different people is I'm continuously stirred by the fact that the gospel advances at the rate of relationship. And it's these I met moments. It's these moments where people engage with one another, and out of that relationships starts birthing something that brings about transformation, that brings about change within their context. I was in a city, and in this particular city, their desire was to see the next generation come to Christ. And so their focus was all about, it was a city team that was focusing on this thing. But there was a national network in another country that was actually building a way to mobilize teenagers to share the gospel with friends, right? And so what was happening is they've developed the material, they've got the training ready, they've got the whole process ready, but this city movement is reinventing the wheel. And so they're asking my advice on the reinvention of the wheel. And I'm asking them, so have you considered that somebody might have done this already? And they're like, no, but I mean, if somebody's done it, surely we have heard about it, but which they haven't. And then I introduced them to the materials, and they went, oh, that's what we're trying to build. So if you imagine for a moment that the Great Commission, or the fulfillment of the Great Commission, or the fourfold vision of Lausanne, whichever way you want to look at it, is this wall that is being built, and we've got to finish the wall. Now, if you read the book of Nehemiah, what you'll find in the book of Nehemiah is that there's spaces where the wall was yay high and spaces where the wall was a little lower, and so forth and so on. And what they did is whenever they were attacked at a point where the wall was lower, they would blow a trumpet and everybody would rally around this particular point where they could, fill this particular gap. And then if you read it, everybody was building the wall in front of their own houses, right? So there was this dichotomy of you've got to take responsibility for what's in front of you, which, I think is true. Is every organization, what's the best thing that you can do for the fulfillment of the Great Commission? Do the part that God has called you to do. So you do your part and the whole of it will be built. So that's the one side. The other side of it is from time to time, there are gaps that the person who is in front of that gap can't fill alone. So we need to rally around it and start filling those gaps. So if you imagine the Great Commission as this wall, you might have heard of something like the 1040 window, right? So the 1040 window, or unreached people groups, represents gaps within this wall. I think to a large extent, the next generation in the developed world presents another one of these gaps in the wall, right? It's one of these things that we've got to rally around and we've got to figure out how to solve together. And so by identifying the different bricks in the wall, if you think of every team working on the fulfillment of the Great Commission as a different brick within this wall, what you'll notice in the wall of the Great Commission, that there are certain gaps, there are certain bits missing, and there are certain opportunities. There are certain bright sparks, certain best practices, certain moments where we're seeing, man, this is working so well. We need to duplicate this throughout the rest of the wall. And our hope is that by getting people to commit to collaborative action, by categorizing these different teams, and this is the network, this is the issue they deal with, this is the region of the world they work in, this is how they relate to generation, by identifying, by getting them to commit, getting them to categorize, and then building connections between these different parts of the wall, I'm convinced that we can catalyze action into the particular gaps. We can blow the trumpets and say, the church, the Great Commission is being attacked in this particular place. Let's jump in there and go make a difference there, because we can do it together. And what's amazing is we will know who's done well in that area and who are the best pieces of the wall, because the difference between the wall Nehemiah was building and the fulfillment of the Great Commission wall we're building is we're not working with physical stones. We're working with the type of stones that Peter speaks about when he says that the church are living stones being built into a spiritual house. We're building with living stones, but we know which stones fit best and would be best at filling which gaps. And the better we know that, the better we can make these connections, or we can put them together into those particular gaps.
I'm kind of person that I prefer efficiency over relationship. So I just need to get work things done. I don't care about the connections being made, I think I'm oriented that way. So I completely understand that stance. But at the same time, what I realize after limited experience that I had about these collaborations and these connections that were being made is that if you do it alone, you probably get the job done faster, maybe, but you'll never do more. You'll only do what you're planned to do, and you just maybe have it faster, but that's it, usually. But what I experienced from my experiences say that it is messy. And sometimes you feel like, you know what, I'm just done with this. It's just too much things that are going on that you just want to leave the table. Mm-hmm. There were moments like that. And sometimes it takes just so much unnecessary time, in my point of view, to get to the point that I thought that it should get. So it feels like it's going around rather than going into very obvious direction. But I'm always amazed at the end by the way God had done and led this whole process and conclusion. And with this, it seemed like a wasted energy, wasted time. And he weaves into something beautiful and incredible, amazing. And he never failed once. He never failed. Every single time, he weaves this wasted time, wasted energy into create something beautiful. And that's the experience that I had. And through each time, I find my limitations, how limited I am. I thought I was gonna able to do all by myself. But with this collaborations, I see my limitation, I see my shortcomings, I see how short-sighted I am, and how incredible things that God placed in each of the people's heart and abilities, and the goodness he placed in them, and how beautifully we complement together. How can we work together? It truly makes me see the beauty of working together. He always be able to do far more than we can ever imagine if we allow him to orchestrate things and me being just a part of his orchestration.
I would like to shift a little bit and speak about what your experiences or what you anticipate to be hindrances to collaboration. And then connected to that question, what are some aspects that you believe will contribute to to people being willing to collaborate together for something like a project like that, to a global initiative to reach the next gen? What would be some hindrances that we can look out for, and what would be some things that we can say this will help make the acceleration of this better?
I think one of the hindrances that I can think of is the impatience, because collaboration takes time. Almost always it takes time. It takes time to, sometimes you have to wait indefinitely, it feels like. Sometimes you'll just have to not, like you have to endure. You just have to not speak your mind. You just have to hold it. But through those processes, because if you're impatient, if you cannot wait, if you cannot endure, then a lot of times you become a stumbling block for the collaboration. The other person might not be impatient, but if you're patient, if you can wait, it can still work.
Wow.
So I think impatience is something of the hindrance. But I think one of the key, and I think this is the first and foremost ingredient to the collaborative action, is Christ himself. Because we're not collaborating because it's a virtue that we need to pursue. Because a secular world also collaborates.
Right.
They collaborate to benefit from each other. They call it win-win, right? You win, I win, we collaborate. But I think in our context, even though I lose, even though I gain nothing, I am collaborating because of the Christ. That is the mentality that we need to have. Because a lot of times you have to be impatient, you have to tolerate. And what do you do? How can you do that in a long period of time? It's because the Christ, that you are died with the Christ. Just Galatians 2:20 says, I died with, I am crucified with Christ. And I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And through the Christ lives in me and you, we can collaborate together. We're centering around, we're collaborating around Christ. Not even the gaps or the finishing of the Great Commission is our mission, but Christ himself is our core mission, and it's a key ingredient for the collaboration.
Mac, I want to circle back to a conversation we were having a little bit earlier about collaboration. One of the big moves that Lausanne is pushing towards is collaborative action. And I'd be curious to hear from you. It sounds like you have been doing a lot of collaboration with people all around the world.
I want to point to some foundational understanding of effective collaboration. Stanford University did some great work on the idea of what's called a backbone organization. And successful collaborations have either a leader or an organization that functions in this backbone capacity. Backbone organizations typically convene people to come together, help create an agenda, help with communication, with resources. And in our model, the centrality of praying together. So for collaborations to work, there has to be a real depth of cohesion. That's really important. A bit of how these collaborations take shape. It's identifying existing assets. We describe it as aggregating to accelerate. We don't want to unnecessarily recreate anything. It's getting leaders and organizations to work together better and smarter rather than to operate independently of one another. So the training movement there is one of our models. In India, one of the things that's been very exciting has been to see the growth of an entrepreneurism track in India. India faces the challenge of working in a Hindu nationalist governmental context, which is not allowing donations from outside of India to come into India through traditional means. And so a lot of these organizations are creating for-profit entities that is a collaboration with entrepreneurs and other organizations so that they can really meet some of the needs that need to be met in that context.
So could you share some challenges you faced in collaborating with others?
Well, there's always going to be some environmental challenges. The economics of a collaboration are always going to be challenging because, we tend to have a view of scarcity in terms of resources. So there's can be a sense of being competitive over resources, who gets what, how do we divide that up? So it takes some thoughtful, mature understanding of how you allocate resources to a collaboration. I think the other barrier is always going to be an insufficient level of trust. If people don't trust each other, then they will tend to be suspicious. I think another barrier is the issue of limited time. And the question that a leader is always going to ask is, do I achieve more by collaborating, or do I achieve more by just going in my own direction, having greater control of my own time? And that needs to be really thought through, because my conviction is that if a collaboration is well designed, then the impact of it will be exponential. When I remember having this conversation with Tim Keller in the year 2000 in a restaurant, and we were talking about the spiritual needs of Manhattan. And Tim said, Manhattan needs all kinds of new churches, and we know they're not all going to be Presbyterian. So he felt like we needed to connect to the other faith communities that could be envisioned to do this together. And Tim was exactly right. By inviting these leaders into this model, they were resourced in a way they wouldn't have been resourced any other way. The power of a good collaboration is that you draw an expertise that could not be accessed in any other way. So that's really the spirit of that. So, well, I'm excited about what God is doing and really some of the hard places around the planet, places like India, Indonesia, the Middle East, parts of Africa, Southern Europe, Latin America, where there's a lot of poverty. God is just raising up some extraordinary leaders. And our vision really is to be a Barnabas to these leaders. You want to come alongside, we want to resource, empower, give them opportunity to lead. We would love to have leadership communities in 1,000 cities over the next 10 years that are not only working together, but really becoming friends with leaders in other parts of the world. Much of this is already happening at a very organic level. But part of the power of Lausanne is to have these rhythmic meetings with younger leaders and the congresses over time. And, it's really building this spiritual and relational muscle. We really feel like if we can see God do in the 21st century what he did in the first century, it'd be very powerful. Because just, I saw a data point last week that said over 80, I think it was 83% of all the people in the world outside of Christianity are in Asia. And so we need to really lean into some of this together as a global church and be very intentional, thoughtful, very deliberate, radical to make a difference. We've all got one life to live, and we want to be as consequential as we can. And the growth of Movement Day, to understand it, we met every year in New York from 2010, 2015. Our first Movement Day outside of the US actually was in Pretoria, working with the Doxa Deo community. And we had several leaders that came there from around the world. We also met in Port-au-Prince in 2015 in Haiti. But the real turning point in the Movement Day story globally was 2016. We had Movement Day global cities in New York City at the Javits Center, which I think is the largest convention center in the world at that time. We had 3,000 leaders, 400 cities, 95 nations that participated. And I think it was the largest missions conference in New York in 100 years. Coming out of that experience, and again, that was a 3-day gathering, and leaders were sufficiently immersed in the vision that they really wanted to adopt the vision back in their own cities. So by that next year, we had Movement Day expressions in places like Chennai, India, Hong Kong, China. We had a great gathering in London in 2017. There was a road show in Africa that year, Cape Town, Pretoria, Durban, and Nairobi. And so it really took off, and it really it continued to grow until we had our 10-year gathering 2020 during COVID online, but we had 900 cities participate. So it really began to take off. I began my formal Lausanne role in 2013, where I became the co-catalyst for cities. The Lausanne community was a good fit for us because we were able to bring Lausanne leaders. In fact, in 2016, Jean-Paul Remp was the Lausanne leader for Europe, and he brought 276 Europeans to New York. I think we had at least 300 from Africa that came. I think Durban brought 100 leaders just as one city.
My hometown.
Yeah, that really happened. That really caused things to accelerate and grow. And we think we're on a trajectory to be in 1,000 cities within the next decade.
The shift of Christianity to the global south is continuing. So we anticipate by the year 2050, which really is right around the corner, that 77% of all Christians will live in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. 77% of all Christians are going to be global south. That is a huge proportion. Now, one concern I have is all of these global tensions that we have between global north and global south. So we have these dynamics where most of the Christians are in the global south, but most of the Christian wealth is in the global north. Most of the Christians are in the south, but a lot of the missionary sending is still from the north. A lot of the so on and so forth. The Christians are in the south, the institutes of theological education are in the north. So we have these tensions that we have to work out as a global Christian family. And that is not easy. And we do see global denominations splitting all the time over these issues, over human sexuality, over women, over all kinds of things. I would love to see more unity and diversity, more big tent thinking, where we're all united by faith in Jesus Christ and self-identification as Christian and the desire to see this moving forward despite theological differences. I would love to see more relationship first and ideology second. I think that would be really healthy for a lot of local and global communities. Unfortunately, I don't see a ton of evidence in that direction as of yet. Global Christianity is pretty fragmented, unfortunately, on a whole host of issues. But I'm hoping that we can have more global exchanges so we can better understand each other, overcome ideological differences, and really join together in the sake of mission.
Yeah, I mean, I so resonate with what you're saying. I think the need for us as believers is to first and foremost find our identity in Christ, in the family of God. And that needs to be first and foremost. And then it's through that we can easily step out of our national cliques and our international denominations and all these things that divide us. First and foremost, identity needs to come from Christ. And I think it's out of that space that we can step into a more meaningful relationship and dialogue as a global church.
I think probably two keys when we started in Cape Town in 2014 was we had one church, I'd call them an early adopter church, but almost like an incubator church that we aligned very closely with. And they were remarkable in two ways. One is as being a resource base in terms of volunteers and people and just loving us in our mission and ministry, giving us office space, But we obviously cultivated that relationship with that church. It was very much a two-way relationship. So making sure that there was a clear accountability, but it also helped us with reputation because we were able to, sounds terrible, piggyback off the credibility of a local church, which I think is important for anyone involved in missions. The second thing I did, which I think is very important for the South African context, but probably elsewhere, even though I've lived in South Africa 25 years, I still recognize a couple of things. One is I'm still British origin. I'm culturally British. I'm a white person in the African context. And so I constantly see myself as operating upon the invitation of majority church leadership within the South African context, which would be Black leadership within the South African context. So very early on, I started an advisory team, and it was 5 pastors of small churches, but in the communities in which we were serving. And I gave them the right to speak into me and the ministry. They weren't a board. They had no governance responsibility in that sense, but we had relational, accountable responsibility. So that principle of submission that as young leaders we struggle with, we want to just go, we've heard from the Lord, we want to do this thing, but I needed to have some people around me that, for my sake, this wasn't about appearances to anyone else. I needed to submit to local leadership. And for me at that point, it was very important that there were local leadership of churches in the communities that we were working with. So that principle of submission, healthy submission, is a word that young people don't like, but actually in that is incredible freedom. Because if you know that you're accountable to someone and they're loving on you and helping you, and then you've got freedom to keep on pushing, to keep on going and keep on innovating. And maybe that would be the third thing I think that was key for us, was we were part of a broader message ministry. One of the other values, a local church with one value, another value of the message was innovation. And so we wanted to adopt the DNA of the kind of mothership, so to speak. So that was good. We adopted the DNA. We wanted to eat, so we adopted certain things like prayer rhythms. We were like, well, if the prayer rhythm in the UK has worked and they've grown as a mission, why would we do anything different than adopt their prayer rhythm? We want to pray as hard as they've been doing, So there were certain things we adopted, but we also recognize we have to adapt to the context. You can't just cookie cut things. Just because, and I think this is the temptation in a globally connected world, is that we think something has worked somewhere, so we just want to copy it and think it's going to have God's blessing. No, actually, we need to listen to the environment that we're in. I think as young leaders, we've got to spend time listening to the environment, and we did that in those early years. And we listened. We went to critical places in the city and tried to observe what God was doing and learn and see what He was doing. And it's the classic thing, comes from the Blackaby teaching, listening and seeing to what God's doing, and then joining Him in that. Then we become far more effective as well. So I think those were kind of critical pillars in those early years. And then, yeah, it's an obvious one. Find the right people to work with. You can waste so much time in ministry working with the wrong people. And so be discerning. Just have that spirit of discernment to say who's going to be with you for the long haul. It was quite interesting that the church partner that I spoke of, they had a picture early on for us, and it was of fighter jets in formation. And then these fighter jets, they were on a mission, they're going on the mission. But as other planes came in, they just locked into formation and they all continued on the same mission. We've carried that with us as well. Find people who are going to lock into formation with you, and then they add capacity to your mission rather than distraction. Okay, those are a few things that come to mind.
That's what movement does. A movement with the city changers and others, they're unity movements. And it's a key. It's the only way that we're going to get the job done. If we, like someone has already said, he's already given us the strategy. We're just not using it. And it's together, because he's giving us so many different giftings, but we're keeping them to ourselves. And so the kingdom can't have the impact that it could because we're not getting together. And maybe just the word of caution says you can't expect commitment, or you can't expect a round table to function, or you can't expect collaboration is the word I'm looking for. You can't expect collaboration unless you spend at least 10% of your time looking for it.
Wow.
That's why we don't have it.
That's a challenge.
That's a huge challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Orthodoxy of collaboration is to the 100%. We all know we need to do it. Orthopraxy, the practice of collaboration, is very little. We don't have time. We don't have time because we're so busy. Something's wrong with our orthodoxy, is not leading to our orthopraxy. So we need to correct that.
We approached to the regional leaders and also issue group leaders, 36 groups we formed, and asked 5 questions to the people, the leaders of these groups. And then these 5 questions go through to the end of this the global listening project. And then I will share what are the 5 questions that is so important. The first one, what are the most significant gaps and remaining opportunities toward the fulfillment of the Great Commission? So gaps and opportunity. Second, what promising breakthroughs and innovations do you see that accelerate the fulfillment of the Great Commission? This is a positive side that we can observe now. Third one, in what areas is greater collaboration most critical in order to see the fulfillment of the Great Commission? Fourth, where is further research needed? This is very simple. What needs to be researched more? And then the last question is, to whom else should we be listening as a part of this process? So these 5 questions we ask the interviewees, and then gather their opinions and experiences, and then make an analysis. And we use grounded theory research methodology. Grounded theory methodology is very helpful because it's not from the theory. It's not the deductive way from theory to the concrete. Rather, we go to the concrete and then try to find out something that we may not even know.
Martin Luther, at least like me, in the sense of, oh, okay, he was born at a time where this new technology had come out, the printing press, and he was able to leverage this new technology to spread a message that he was passionate about, which is true. But if you study his life, one of the things that you see that I think is a hidden insight that gets lost is that Martin Luther was surrounded by contemporaries, by collaborators that made the work that he did and the work of the reformers before him and after him possible. So, you mentioned going to a conference and seeing a big leader on stage and hearing, all the wonderful things they're doing. And I don't know if it's a Western thing, Jason, but it's certainly a human thing that we tend to have this myth of the lone innovator. Like in the United States, we have Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. These people have like singularly reinvented the world. And when you study any of their stories, you see that they're surrounded by dozens, sometimes hundreds of collaborators that are bringing their gifts to the table. So Martin Luther, I'll just give you an example. Martin Luther had a friend and a colleague in Wittenberg, Germany, named Lucas Cranach. And Lucas Cranach was the local artist. He was a court artisan, but he was also an entrepreneur. And the thing about Lucas was that by the time Luther had sort of risen to prominence, Lucas had one of the largest art production shops in all of Germany. And he also invested in local print mills because he saw the power of the message that Luther was trying to spread, but also the practicality of if we don't create print mills, which can then create, or, paper mills that can create more paper that we can then print on and spread the message, we're going to have a problem. So without Lucas Cranach getting ahead of, candidly, the sort of business and sort of logistics side of the work that Luther was doing, we might not have ever heard of Martin Luther. And so you look at any of these innovators, air quotes, in life, and you really study them and you realize they were surrounded by collaborators.
Yeah, I mean, I so appreciate that. And, even as you were speaking about Martin Luther, I mean, it almost felt, as I've read his story, that innovation happened to him. He didn't go around looking for it. He he put his treaty up onto the church wall, but someone else took that and was innovative with it. And that's how that message spread. And, the other thing that I appreciate about what you said is this idea of there's nothing new under the sun. And on a personal level, I always felt that I was not a creative person because I wasn't artistic in school or I couldn't draw that picture, right? Because that was like how creativity or innovation, if you translate it into like a more adult sense, that's how I understood it. But then I realized, I think it was from a GLS conference, there was someone who was speaking about innovation and creativity. And he mentioned that, nothing is new under the sun, almost like you did, and how the only person who has created something out of nothing was God himself. For the rest of human history, it's always been humans creating something out of something. And to take ideas, to hear what is being spoken about and contextualize that within your own space, that is creativity and innovation. I don't know if that resonates with you, if that is that a helpful way of thinking about innovation?
Oh, absolutely. I love the work of Lausanne. I first got involved maybe 15 years ago. And every time, by the way, I'll tell you this, every time I feel like, Lord, I don't know what certainly I have to bring. And I certainly don't know, how you'll connect this. But every time I've been just so encouraged. And so
That's a great question. In my book, I talk about wicked problems. So wicked problems they have actually a very specific definition, but they're the type of large scale problems that are so difficult that no single entity is going to solve them. They're complicated. They have definition issues. They seem like they're going to roll on forever. We kind of throw up our hands and think this will never get better. Well, the Great Commission is in a sense, one of these problems. And the only way that we're going to see serious forward momentum is by lots and lots of collaboration. And so the most exciting thing to me is that we are collaborating on a global scale and everybody's invited to the table to try to figure out what we can be doing together that we can't do alone. That's really the promise of a large network like Lausanne. And I really do get the sense that this Congress is trying to aim right in that wheelhouse and focus on that kind of thing. So that's encouraging and exciting.
The Great Commission necessitates cooperation and associationalism. So we cooperate and we associate with others in order to accomplish that Great Commission. Now, that church could send somebody. I mean, we can go back and we see pictures of that where people, the Moravians, sent out 1/10 of their people. So they could send out, a little church of 50 could send out, maybe households, maybe one household would go out and do that. But the problem is what we found in 2,000 years of missions history is we need some training. We need to understand cross-cultural realities. We need some support systems. One pastor would say famously to one missionary, you go and I'll hold the ropes. So we need people to hold the ropes. So that's where those ropes kind of connect us together. So what happens is that local churches all around the world, so in Africa and in South America and in Russia, and in Southeast Asia, all around the world are given the Great Commission. They have to find ways to partner together to accomplish that Great Commission. And then they collaborate, in ways that advance it. Now, it gets a little tricky sometimes because, Pentecostals and Presbyterians, they both love Jesus and they both believe in being born again by the power of the gospel, but they're going to plant churches that are probably different and probably in their own denominational families.
Another challenge was in the ministry that we've been called to here in InterVarsity. We had this huge vision that required partnership. I know that in the Lausanne movement, for example, partnership is key and global collaboration is key. And certainly in my daily work, the vision we have in campus ministry is so great. We've got this vision to see every campus in the country have a gospel movement, and many do not. It required collaboration and working together. And that was a challenge because many of the ministries did not work so well together, And so how do we help movements and different ministries work together?
So let's dive into this idea of partnership, the challenge that comes with it. You mentioned that the Lausanne movement at the moment has a very strong emphasis for this whole idea of collaborative action. And I've been wondering to myself, there's a tension between what you're describing with the friendships that you formed of like, we need each other, we need community. And then there's also this element of action and partnership. In your mind, is there a distinction between those two things? Do you, as you consider partnerships and collaboration, is there a tension that plays out between community and collaboration?
I don't think there's a tension as much as I would say sometimes we can mistake relational connection or relational unity with what you might call, structural partnership or, some structural initiatives, organizational initiatives. So, and both are important. I think it's important to have relationship with one another, speak well of one another, have unity in Christ through our words together. That's certainly very important. Often that's the easier part, but that takes time and that takes investment as well. And then when you get to like structural ways to actually collaborate or partner together, that's when it gets more difficult because then often you're talking about using organizational resources, organizational time and priorities, people, and allocating them towards doing something together. And that means that you're usually not doing something in order to do this new partnership thing. So that's when it gets a little bit more challenging. But I think both are important.
One of the things that Lausanne is really trying to encourage within our own network and within the movement is this idea of collaborating together. How do you go about building and maintaining strong partnerships and collaborations across all these diverse sectors? You're talking about, different denominations that have, different distinctives and business, and you got cultural leaders, and you're trying to focus them around the centrality and the power of the gospel. How do you go about doing that and helping people break out of the paradigms that I think many of us have, that this is how it's done, right? This is the strategy, this is right, and everyone else is wrong. How do you bridge those gaps?
So I think that trust and relationship are so important, in building partnerships and collaborations. So trust is the very important capital, and trust is the result, is usually the result of strong relationships. I mean, if people can come and sit around a table and be able to sit down and open their hearts and transparently talk about how the gospel is impacting them, why repentance is important, how we are all sinners and undeserving, but God has been gracious only because of what his son has done for us on the cross. If we could agree on those things and then in humility knit our hearts together and say that, hey, you know what? We live in a broken world. We are all broken people. We all need grace. We all need forgiveness. If we have received all of that, from the Lord, and then we need to dish that out to each other. It's not the starting point, therefore, the thing that brings everyone together is not the vision. It's not the strategy. It is not even the fact that we are one denomination. Of course, we are multiple denominations, or that we all agree in a particular distinctive together. We would not. We will never. We honor each other's distinctives and all of that. We respect that, but that is not the reason why we are here together. We are here together because the gospel is changing our lives, and it will change the lives of the lost that is outside the room. So we bring people trans-denominationally. We partner with people everywhere and rally them around the gospel. And nobody would disagree with the gospel. We don't rally around strategy. We don't rally around distinctives, denominational distinctives, because then there is going to be, we will never be able to unite around those things. But we all can unite around the gospel. That's the beauty of, I believe, of City to City, because all the other things we say is secondary. Gospel is primary. So let's just unite around the gospel. Yeah. So if you're asking me what partnership makes a healthy network, I mean, when partners believe in the power of the gospel, that's the first thing, to change lives and to change cities and to change churches, where partners are less interested in pushing their own personal agenda in favor of seeing the gospel changing lives, where partners love the city together and desire to engage the culture with the gospel, and therefore they make prayer a priority around the needs of the city. So that makes a great network that is healthy.
I think Lausanne is not a mission agency. It's not a group with an agenda. It's a group that brings leaders together, iron sharpening iron, so that they can grow and be more effective in their ministry, not in Lausanne's ministry. So Lausanne is an umbrella organization. The thing that happened in the Olympics, Lausanne was not involved. They didn't fund it, anything, but it provided the umbrella under which all these groups could work. They could never have worked together under any other umbrella. But Lausanne provided that umbrella and got some credit for it, maybe, but the hard work was done by the organization themselves. So I look to Soul 2024 as an umbrella again, that people who are living close by each other or what having same ministry and have never benefited from the wisdom and experience of others who happen to be in a different ecclesiastical grouping than they are will benefit. I hope there'll be small groups. I hope people will benefit from each other. I hope there'll be a concern on this new concept of intergenerational. We're not just focusing on young people, but we want these young people to learn from the older people, but the older people to also learn from the young. And I've learned a lot from people much younger than me in my ministry and life, and they're brilliant people. What they're doing, I could never do.
The heart of it was that my respected and much loved brother-in-law, Billy Graham, had his senses. He'd gone around the world of meeting all these people in his crusades who were doing great things, serving the Lord, and they didn't know each other. And there wasn't much opportunity for communication, the sharing of vision. And he kept thinking and dreaming, how could we make that happen? So I'm thinking back just this morning as I was reflecting before we started talking. It began in Montreux, Switzerland, back in about 1961, when about 30 people came at the invitation of Billy Graham, which led to another gathering a little bit later, and then a whole series of congresses that took place, starting in Berlin, 1966, and then follow-up congresses in Singapore, in Ottawa, in Amsterdam, various parts of the world, I think one in Bogota, Colombia, all of which brought together leaders from those areas and culminated in the Lausanne Congress itself. So there was a whole series behind it. I think it's worth mentioning because sometimes don't realize this. Lausanne would not have taken place if it had not been that the Lord called, gave Billy Graham the vision, the calling for it. And people think it was a joint vision. Well, it became that, but it really started out of his heart. And I think back, here I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, 2.5 miles of where he grew up on a red clay farm to a godly family. At first, nobody really had heard of him. God took a man like that, took him around the world, gave him that vision. And he also wanted to be a vision of the Lord, not of himself. So, people sometimes think that John Stott was one of the original founders of it. Well, John played an important part, but I think we need to pay credit to the fact that God used the vision of my brother-in-law for the world, not just for narrow vision. And then in 1970, it seemed like there might be time for another large world congress. So we met in Washington, D.C., and that was 1971, actually. And there was a sense maybe we weren't quite ready for it. I think John Stott felt that we weren't mature enough yet as evangelicals. So we waited and prayed for another year, met again in a hotel in West Virginia, and laid the plans for what became Lausanne 74. And I remember talking to Billy several times and saying, what was on your heart? And he said exactly that. I saw the people that God was using around the world and felt that we needed to come together and know each other, pray together, work together. So that was the seed of it. And I had the privilege, of course, of serving as the program chair for the first Lausanne Congress. I actually enjoy it. I work in it too, but one of the most fulfilling opportunities that I ever had. So that's sort of how the vision began and spread. The timing of the Lausanne Congress was interesting because there were a whole series of things that were happening around the world. After World War II, you had the quick, almost rapid growth of evangelism around the world, new mission agencies, new parachurch ministries, missionary organizations that were taking on new forms and ways of doing things. And they often didn't know each other very much. There was only the World Evangelical Fellowship, which was a very good fellowship, but only the people in that particular group of churches belonged to it. So there was a need for some coordination. There was also a theological crisis at that time, particularly around Christology and the authority of Scripture, because that was very, very much debated. The World Council of Churches of Bangkok in 1973 had virtually said that the time of missions is through. In fact, some churches were even saying there should be a moratorium from the West. We don't need to send out missionaries anymore. And so that nerve was cut, both theologically and in terms of strategy. There was a sense, perhaps, well, haven't we finished the task? Well, we had not. And the work of people like Donald McGavran from India and Peter Wagner and Ralph Winter, others, helped us understand the unreached people groups, 10,000 or 12,000 around the world who never heard the gospel. It was also a time of the 60s, a great upheaval. The Vietnam War was underway. In the United States, a great deal of struggle over racial justice, a sense of poverty and hunger around the world, the rich nations, the poor nations. So on all of those things came together at a very crucial time in history. So it was a moment when we needed what Lausanne could bring. So it was out of that the committee was formed with wonderful leaders on it, most of whom Billy knew very well, and a little committee that we organized it, and we finally decided on Europe. We looked at places in Africa and Asia, but there was no facility at that time that could handle a Congress of that size, so Lausanne became the place. So hence, Lausanne. So that's sort of how we got there.
Awesome. Truly appreciate you. Really feel like this has added value to those who listen. So thank you for your time.